Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Civic Forum. My name is Rory Truex. My guest today is Ezra Levin. Ezra is the co-founder and co-executive director, along with his wife, Leah Greenberg, who could not be here today, of Indivisible. You probably remember and recognize Indivisible because it's one of the primary organizations behind the NoKings protests, among many other aspects of the pro-democracy movement. So thank you, Ezra, for joining me today.
Hey, great to be talking, Rory.
So I wanted to start. We are recording on November 5th, which is the day after the election, where we saw Mandani win in New York City, Mikey Sherrill win in New Jersey, by 13 points, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia by 15 points, California Prop 50. In many ways, a good day for the Democrats, and I think by extension, given the political climate, the pro-democracy movement. So Ezra, what's your reaction to the events of yesterday? How's morale in the office today?
Oh my gosh, you couldn't have picked a better day. We've been doing this for the better part of a decade. We started shortly after Trump was first elected in 2016. This is the best election night we've ever had. And it's not about Indivisible. It's not about the Democratic Party. To your point, this is about the forces that are fighting for democracy against the forces that are trying to impose authoritarianism on the country. So I am inspired to see a ideologically diverse, geographically dispersed set of election victories against an overreaching authoritarian regime. And I think that's what we saw last night. And there's a lot of political commentary now trying to define this as this is a win for the left or this is a win for the center of the party or the establishment. And, I think it's a win for the pro-democracy forces. That's the through line I see. It doesn't matter exactly where you were on economic or social progressive positions. There was a range that we saw in the votes yesterday, but the through line for everybody was these were folks who were standing up to the regime. And that's really encouraging to see because I think, as you know, authoritarians win by convincing us that we don't have power, that we're alone, that they are inevitable, that they are irresistible, and that our voice doesn't matter. And so finding opportunities to express our voice and to demonstrate that actually, no, this is still a democratic republic. We still do indeed have power is so important. And there's a real danger that folks just give into cynicism or fatalism or nihilism. And so moments like this where people can be inspired, where folks can actually have their voice heard and claim some amount of power back are so important in this long-term fight. I don't think this is the end. We have not suddenly saved democracy. I am bracing for the impact because the regime, I think, will not stand for a loss like this. I think they will crack down and continue to escalate their attack on the opposition. But it was a good day. It was a good day. And in the environment we're in, I will take a good day.
Well, and I think I really appreciate what you said about basically demoralization, and that is a key theme of these governments is that they make political opposition seem impossible.
Yep.
And so I do think it's important to celebrate the wins, however big or small they may be, in order to keep morale high, because as you said, this is not something that will disappear overnight. This is a very long and protracted contest for our democratic values. Relatedly, we are also coming on the heels of another significant event, which was the October NoKings event.
Right.
Depending on how you count, and frankly, it's very difficult to count protesters, but you see estimates range from 5.5 million to 7 million, 7.5 million. For me, it doesn't really matter the precise number. I think by any measure, it's the single largest protest in American history on a single day, which is a true achievement. The other noteworthy thing is that there is clear sign of momentum. The April hands-off was 3 million, I think. June, NoKings, 5 million. So we see real growth in the movement, and it's spreading at a time when, as you said, the Trump administration is getting more and more repressive. So tell me how you reacted to that event. I mean, was there anything actually, I guess we should start. Is there anything surprising to you about how the event unfolded, looking back just a few weeks ago?
Look, we planned so much for NoKings too. And we spend most of our time planning not for the best case scenario. We spend our time planning for the worst case scenario. We spend our time training tens of thousands of safety volunteers, of holding trainings on de-escalation and security, on preparing ABC level plans, if this, then that. And to have it go off so wonderfully well, to plan for the worst and get the best, that in some ways was surprising because of how much of our mental energy was spent trying to prevent the worst from happening. And so spending a lot of our, using up a lot of our headspace on those bad case scenarios, the the Speaker of the House and members of the regime spent the couple of weeks leading up talking about how we were violent Marxists and there was going to be blood in the streets, painting this image of America at each other's throats, Trump America and everybody else. And look, we knew that image wasn't real, but we also worried that we were going to see some real crackdowns from the regime or from regime supporters, wackadoodles who were inspired by their violent rhetoric to take it out on peaceful protesters. And that's why we spent so much time preparing our organizers and the folks on the ground to make sure that these were peaceful, insistent, pro-democracy, but peaceful events. I saw one of my favorite parts of this story was the Texas National Guard being called out by Greg Abbott and the Austin organizers of NoKings saying, well, great. I hope that the National Guard members enjoy our dancing and music. That was the overall response. So I think two things contribute to that. One is just the type of people who are showing up. These are not professional politicos. They're obviously not professional agitators. These are nurses and teachers and IT technicians and software developers and waitresses. They're normal people who care about democracy, are worried that they're losing it, or showing up. And two, we did a lot of prep. We did a lot of prep to make sure that these were successful events. And I think it came together in an incredible way. And as you said, this didn't happen in a vacuum. It was 3 million in April, 5 million in June, 7 million in October. If you believe some of the authoritarian research, Erica Chenoweth, Maria Stephan, and others, that what we need is 3.5%, not just showing up on a single day, but actively engaged and pushing back against the regime. 7 million ain't bad. It's not there yet. It's not bad. We need to get to 9 million, then 11 million. Once we hit 13 million, I think we surpass the 3.5%, and I'll be happy. But the real measure of success for this isn't how many people just show up on one day. That's part of it. The real measure is how many people stay engaged and productive on the ground work to contest for power in this regime, which is why yesterday is so important. I have been laughingly calling November 4th NoKings 3. And I mean that only half sarcastically. I think there's a fair amount of political science research on the connection between peaceful protest and election outcomes, months or in some cases more than a year later. It is no surprise to me that 2.5 weeks after the largest protest in American history against the regime, we see catastrophic results for the regime in a historic election on November 4th. That makes sense, and it wasn't an accident. There's a reason why we scheduled NoKings 2 a couple of weeks before this coming election, because we knew we wanted to focus people's attention on exactly what this regime was starting to do and why it was so important for them to show up and prove that they do indeed hold the power.
Well, and I wanted to talk about this idea of the relationship between street protests and mobilization and then electoral outcomes. Yeah. Because I would say I do have a fair number of protesters in my life, and there is always this question of, I'm out here with a sign, what is this doing? And how is this actually meaningfully impacting change? And in social science, we would say a few things. One, you're exercising your right. You have to keep registering your right over and over again, especially at a moment like this. 2, you're building community. 3, you are building kind of that democratic muscle. Gary Kasparov talks about like our democratic immune system. I think our immune system is kicking into gear right now. And then that is creating an energy and a momentum. So there is our answer that we would say in our field, but I'm curious how you're seeing it as someone who's really organizing and really mobilizing quite a lot of people through your work.
Yeah, we hear the same question. Frankly, the debate around this, I hear people who underplay the importance of peaceful protest. I hear people who overplay the importance. Like, they think that if we hit a certain number of people in the streets on a day, suddenly we've won and game over, democracy succeeds, Trump leaves office. And obviously that's not the case. A protest is a tactic. A tactic should fit into a strategy. A strategy should be designed to help you achieve your goal. Our goal is to limit harm and fracture their coalition, build ours, and retake power so that democracy can reassert itself. The strategy we employ is mass, peaceful people power. And one of the ways that that strategy is carried out in the real world is through individual days of protest. And those individual days of protest, as you said, they help build community. They burst this bubble of inevitability of power that the regime tries to project. They help people connect with each other. I'm from a rural town in Texas where the word Democrat, when I was growing up, was a bad word. People were not connected to any kind of progressive movement or pro-democracy movement. I think in a lot of parts of the country, especially red and rural areas, it's easy to feel like you're alone. And this guy is going to succeed. And even in other blue parts of the country, you might see what he's doing with the National Guard or with his secret police force through ICE, terrorizing communities. It might seem like he's just picking up steam, and maybe the country is accepting that, and we should just give up. What's the point of pushing back? These displays of people power are an opportunity to bust through and say, no. This era that we're in right now, it is temporary. This is not a Trump era. We are in a NoKings era where democracy will reassert itself. And the way we prove that is by doing stuff, exercising our rights in a way that the regime does not want. And we know they don't want it because they threaten us when we do it. We know they don't like it because they try to spin like it never happened after we succeed in carrying off the largest protests in American history. And all that said, we got to plug people in to long-term organizing, to actually doing this work on the ground. Because to the cynic's point, a one-day protest, a Saturday turns into Sunday, turns into Monday, and the media moves on. And so the real question is, what do you do with the 7 million people, many of whom never participated in a protest before, suddenly are interested? What do you do with that energy? And if you don't capture it, harness it, and direct it to productive on-the-ground work that feels meaningful, that feels real, then it dissipates, it evaporates, and you got to start from square one again, which is why we spend half the time planning the event and the other half the time planning, okay, what comes next? What are we building to next? Which is why you schedule an event like this a few weeks before an election, and why you create action items immediately afterwards, like a boycott of Spotify that we're currently doing for running ads for recruiting ICE. I hope people understand this as an important tool in our tool belt, but it can't be the only thing that we do.
Well, and this is perhaps too optimistic, but my feeling is I think this is awakening something in the American people, and you would say that our democracy has sort of been waning in terms of the strength of our society, our civil society, the kind of isolation of the social media era, and I think by re-energizing people, there's a world where 5, 10, 15 years from now we have a much more invigorated democracy because people have been reactivated and re-energized.
Well, you brought this up, and I want to double down on it. You mentioned the social media era that we're in right now. I do think there is a tech fascist movement that is actively isolating us and damaging our democracy, and it succeeds by making us feel alone, having us swipe, and extracting from us. They do not want us to come together in the most human way possible in community to talk about our needs and to come together in protection of ourselves, and they fear democracy. They view people as a problem to be solved. In an ideal techno-fascist world, that they are accumulating power and wealth, and the people are rounding error. And so I don't think there's going to be a path to a healthier democracy that allows these tech giants to continue to prey on our institutions and our communities. I don't think it's possible. I think there's got to be widespread rejection of the world that they're trying to create and an embrace of participatory democracy. Because in the absence of that, if we're not actively engaged, if we're not coming together in community in order to participate in our democracy, they're the ones that are going to be leading it. And that's the play that they're making right now. Gosh, look at an interview with Peter Thiel when he's asked if he thinks humanity is worth saving, and he has to pause. This is a guy that's investing in blood transfusions from younger people so he can extend his own life. It's a guy who actively is pursuing something other than a democratic system of government, whether that's oligarchy or monarchy or something else that's antiquarian. I think it's scary stuff coming from that space, and they have a lot of power right now. I don't think that's just a sideshow. I think it's directly tied to the weakening of our democracy, and we got to wake up to it if we're going to save our institutions.
Well, we could spend a whole hour talking about the tech right. And I was just going to plug Mike Brock, who's a writer on Substack, who's done a lot of writing on some of these issues. I wanted to talk about humor because I actually think there's something quite beautiful about protest. And I went to a protest in a town next to my hometown in Connecticut. And the fact that the symbol of this protest is the inflatable Tyrannosaurus Rex or chicken, it's just glorious because we know protests often have these symbols. I study China. We think of the pro-independence movement in Hong Kong as the umbrella. We think of the A4 revolution, the white piece of paper. And the American symbol is the inflatable. It's not even one animal. It's many animals. But I think humor matters, right? Like these types of leaders don't like to be mocked, but also humor also shows this protest for what it is, which is silly, peaceful. It's hard to look at somebody in a Tyrannosaurus Rex costume and be threatened by them. And I think that was a very important thing. So I'm wondering what your reaction to that symbol emerging kind of organically.
I loved it. I loved how organic it was. I mean, that was coming out of Portland. We saw that and we thought it was brilliant for the reason you stated, and I'll add one more, but I just to double down on what you said. Authoritarians want to be feared, right? They want us to be scared of them. It is totally fine in Trump's mind for us to accuse him of being an autocrat, of him being vicious, of him being a crook. That's him being powerful. And he's fine being feared. He's fine being hated. He does not want ridicule. He does not want to be seen as ridiculous. And this is because the authoritarian strength comes from the belief that they are powerful, the belief that they are scary, the belief that they have control. And ridicule really busts that bubble. So exactly the reason you said, there's not a better response to a ridiculous mobilization of National Guard from Texas and Chicago than to supposedly put down violent unrest in the streets than to show up in this ridiculous manner. That is the best possible message you can get. If you treat them purely like a scary authoritarian force that needs to be physically combated, they're going to win. They have far more control over physical force than we do. What they don't have control over is public support. And we build public support by being thoughtful about the tactics that are going to send the right message. But the other thing that you didn't mention that I think is really important is humor also makes these protests something that people want to be part of. And this cannot just be a fight of the activist class that is aligned with us and is serious about it and goes out because they're doing their duty to protect democracy. And like, it's hard work, it's grueling work, it's scary work, but damn it, we're going to do it for the good of democracy. That's part of it. There's always going to be a role. And look, I'm in that camp. That's how I feel about the current fight. But if this isn't a party, if this isn't welcoming, if this isn't something that people have FOMO over not participating in, we are not going to achieve the numbers we need. So I think humor allows this to be accessible to a broader range of people who might agree with us, but would never show up at a take down the regime kind of protest. But they would show up and be like, oh, cool, I get to put on a funny costume or give the finger to the regime. That I'm down with. That's something that seems fun. And I think a path forward to growing from 7 million to 9 million to 11 million has to lean heavily into that kind of welcoming, fun culture as we do something quite serious, fight for American democracy.
Ezra, I want to be sensitive to your time. I wanted to ask one last question in this line of broadening the coalition. And for me, I think one of the key factors here are basically the disaffected Republicans. And this is a very special population. These are people that are ideologically aligned with Trump, but nevertheless realize that what he's doing is wrong and anti-democratic. And I wanted to praise those types of folks because I think that requires a certain level of courage to take that stance. At the same time, Indivisible and other organizations are framed as progressive. So how do you think about broadening the camp to include these people that ideologically might be a little bit different from most of what's associated with this protest?
Oh, I think it's absolutely necessary. I think if you look at the successful anti-authoritarian movements in other parts of the world, the coalition of no is intentionally quite broad. And we have to build a very large tent that is able to say no. I was very proud on Hands Off, which was our first major mobilization this year, that is endorsed by the Never Trump Republicans and Matt Iglesias from the center or center right or wherever you want to put him, to the DSA and the socialists. There was this broad, ideologically diverse coalition that could say, look, we're not going to agree on what the Democratic platform for a Democratic trifecta in 2029 ought to be. And that's okay, because the issue today is not that. The issue today is autocracy versus democracy. Do we have constitutional rights or don't we? And we can align on that. Mo Mitchell over at Working Families Party has a good line that I've used a lot, but I try to credit him every time. He says, if you're in a room organizing in this moment and everybody agrees your room's too small, you need to expand that room. I think our success depends on welcoming people who have not been here in. The part that I would quibble with you on is I think a far larger population that would be welcoming in are actually the politically disaffected. People who voted for Trump, not because they're MAGA Republicans, or maybe not even because they're Republicans, but because the choice presented to them was a failed status quo versus something else. And Trump was making a lot of claims. He was promising to blow up the system, to lower your price of bread and eggs. And that was attractive compared to the Democratic offering, which was more or less the status quo. And a lot of people were willing to roll the dice on that. I think they're feeling betrayed right now because their prices have not gone down, and Trump is very visibly self-enriched while blowing up the system. So I do think we should welcome them into our coalition with open arms and say, look, you have a right to be pissed off. Your needs aren't being met. The system has failed you, and Trump isn't helping you out. He's only enriching himself and concentrating power in his own hands. And I think a successful movement in this moment does that. Now, it's not enough, though, to just say no. I think one classic problem anti-authoritarian movements face is after the authoritarian goes, or once they accumulate some amount of power, not agreeing on, okay, what is the next step? So while we build a big coalition that says no, I think it is important, especially in the upcoming primaries that are coming up in the coming months, for us to define what it is to be part of the fight back faction of the Democratic Party and what we're looking for. And what is the biggest version of that actually represents real accountability and real reform. I think we're going to see that. I sure hope we do, because I think we're going to take the House and possibly the Senate next year. And I think without intervention, it's not really clear what that Democratic Party will do.
Well, and thank you. You left me with a perfect segue, which is planning moving forward. Ezra and Leah, on a weekly basis, have a Zoom. What's the plan? Which is every Thursday at 3 p.m. And you can sign up on Indivisible's website to kind of keep track of what the movement's doing moving forward. You can also get involved in your local Indivisible chapter. And there are, I believe, thousands of these chapters at this point. So Ezra, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your time. And thank you for everything you're doing for democracy.
Rory, great to talk. I just would emphasize, I am not the leader of this movement. There are 2,700 local Indivisible groups all across the country who are leading themselves. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you're wondering what comes next, the answer is whatever you do. And the best way to do that is not by yourself, but in community with other folks. There's probably a local Indivisible group nearby you that you can join. If there's not, you can form one. If you don't want to form one and there's a different organizing home, great, do it. But don't be alone in this moment. Don't wait for the next election in this moment. You should be reaching out to people in your own community and figuring out where your leverage is, where your power is, and use it.